In this part, I would like to show you Unity's extremely powerful terrain engine. It's a very fast and efficient method to create a level very quickly. To create a new terrain, go up to the Terrain menu and hit Create Terrain. Now, as soon as you do that, you will notice that when you zoom out, there's a big field created, which is our terrain. If I go back to the floor that we've created, it's a lot smaller. Now, our terrain is a little bit too huge for us right now, so let's change that by going to Terrain and then hit Set Resolution. This is the resolution of the terrain, the width and the length. Let's change this to 200 instead of 2000 for both the width and the length. As soon as we hit Set Resolution, you will notice that the terrain is now smaller. It still looks big, but it is smaller. Now, a lot of our terrain is currently not lit with a light. So to do that, let's add another light to our scene by going to Game Object, Create Other, and then Directional Light. Now, as I've said before, directional light is basically like a sunlight. What it does is it's light that keeps going and going and going forever. However, the effect right now is not very visible because it's horizontally aimed. We can change that really easily by clicking the Rotate tool and then rotating it downwards, and as you can see, the whole terrain is now lit pretty brightly. Of course, we can add multiple of these lights in different directions so that every angle has a different color, but for now this is fine. Let me focus on the terrain and hit the F key to focus on it and zoom back in. Alright, as soon as I select the terrain in my hierarchy, you can see that the inspector does not only have some components going on, but in fact there's an entire menu that is created for this particular object. Now, let's go and click the first tool, and this tool will raise or lower the height of the terrain. Now, there's a couple of brushes available, but we'll just click the first one, and then let's change the opacity down to almost nothing. A 9 would be correct. The brush size is fine, but be careful with the opacity because as soon as we start painting, this terrain will raise its height very, very fast. If I zoom in a little closer and I start clicking with my mouse, that, as you can see, now has a blue pointer. As I start clicking, you will see that mountains start being created. It's an extremely fast tool to create some mountains and some landscape type of environment in 3D space. Now, of course, you can change the opacity and the size of the brush, but I would recommend to keep your opacity as low as possible because it's easier to just click a couple of times to raise the terrain than it is to fix something that is super huge. Now, if you think you've gone a little bit too far, like this little mountain right here is a little bit out of range, you can press the Shift key and then draw, and it will decrease the effect and thus lower the terrain. If you do it without the Shift key but just click, you will notice that the terrain will raise itself. Now, these are extremely powerful tools, and let's look at the second one here. And this one sets the terrain height also, but not by lowering and raising it, but actually by flattening the terrain. Before I show you this, let me make these mountains a little huge. And now when I go to the second tool, you can see again the same brushes can be used. The opacity, but now there's also a height. Now this height is fixed, and let's set it, for example, to 60. As soon as I start drawing, it fixes the current height to 60, which is a little higher than what we have right now. So let me undo this and set the height to something even smaller, say 18. Now as soon as I start drawing, you will notice that the terrain is being flattened, and this is what this second tool does. This is very handy, for example, if you want to create roads in your level or in your terrain, because it flattens the terrain at the set height that you have selected. Now there's a couple other more tools that we can use, and for example to paint grass and trees, so let's look at those in the next video.